The Egyptians have enslaved the Israelites. They're forcing them to work for them. And after Nick introduced that situation to us, it gets even worse than that. Because what goes on to happen is the Pharaoh, the king of the Egyptians, is so threatened by the Israelites that he starts a program to try and wipe out all the baby boys of a generation. And so he gives a law that any baby boy that's born is supposed to be thrown into the River Nile and drowned. It's terrible. And actually you may see some similarities here with the story that we heard last week about what happens at the end of the story of the wise men. That when the wise men have finished visiting Jesus, they're warned not to go back to Herod. And because Herod feels so threatened by the birth of a baby, that he responds in exactly the same way as Pharaoh did thousands of years before. And he orders all the baby boys in Bethlehem to be killed. And Jesus escapes from that and flees to Egypt. You see there's some really interesting mirrors and parallels that go on. And as we go through the Exodus story, one of the things that's going to be really interesting for us to look at is to see how this amazing story, this big story of Exodus, points us towards the even bigger story of Jesus and God's rescue plan for the whole world. And so that's something to definitely be looking out for. But the Israelites are in real trouble. Things are not looking good. And it's times of darkness that real heroes step up. In COVID, we appreciated the NHS more than we've done in a long time, didn't we? We clapped for them and we said, go, NHS, you're the heroes, you're on the front line, you're helping people, saving lives. And for the Israelites, it's an unlikely source that their first set of heroes come from. I didn't want to skip over this bit, because in chapter 2, there's an amazing story of how the midwives of the Israelites defy the orders of a king. And they go and they deliver the babies, and then they report back to the Egyptians and say, sorry, we got there too late. They're too good at giving birth, so they gave birth before we got there. And so they use that as an excuse of why they haven't found and killed the babies, because their babies are delivered too quickly. And so this bunch of midwives, not only doing their job and helping deliver babies safely into the world, but are also standing between the might of a kingdom and these poor defenceless infants and protecting them from death. I think that's pretty amazing. And I didn't want us to just brush past that, because there's so much in Exodus and so many great stories. And so then we come to, in chapter 2, we get the birth of a guy called Moses. He's born into a fairly normal Hebrew Israelite family, not particularly wealthy or anything like that. And his mum, understandably, wants to save him to make sure that he doesn't get killed by the Pharaoh's soldiers. And so she throws him in the Nile herself, but not without constructing a basket to keep him safe. You might know this story before. It's quite a famous part of Exodus. She wraps him up, puts him in a basket, and puts him on the Nile, entrusts him to God, that God will keep him safe. And his big sister Miriam goes alongside the bank of the river to try and check that he's all right. And it just so happens that God brings him past the royal palace, where one of the princesses of Egypt, one of Pharaoh's daughters, is there. And she sees the basket and hears the cries of the baby inside, and takes the baby in and adopts it into the royal household. How amazing is that? You go from the possibility of death, born into a poor family, sentenced to die, and suddenly royalty. And even better than that, because God's amazing in the way that he does things. Miriam can be found nearby, because the princess is like, well, I'm going to need a nursemaid to look after this child. And Miriam goes, I think I can help you out there. Just so happens I know someone. And so Moses gets to be looked after by his own mum and brought up knowing about God, the God who's already rescued him personally from the hands of Pharaoh, and gets to know what the people that he's part of, despite what any modern adaptions will tell you. He knows that he's an Israelite, that he is part of God's people, and that he's been privileged to find this special place in Pharaoh's household. So that's the start of the story where Moses comes into it. One of the main characters that will follow all the way through this Exodus story. And I just thought it was really interesting that Moses was born as in humble origins, had to escape death, and was adopted as royalty. And the reason I think that's interesting is because, well, that's kind of our journey, isn't it? We're born as humble human beings, and nothing particularly special about us. And we face death. Death is the great thing that we want to escape from. But because of what Jesus has done for us, we can escape death and be adopted as God's sons, royalty. So I think the start of this story of Exodus is encouraging us, at least initially, to identify with Moses, to see ourselves in Moses, to hear God's call on our lives as we hear God's call on Moses' life. And the reason that it's possible for us to have this journey, for us to be rescued from humble birth through death, to be heirs of the greatest king ever, is because Jesus did the journey the opposite way. Jesus, who didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but gave it up, being born as a human baby and being obedient to death, even death on a cross. And so you can see again how this story is capturing and mirroring against Jesus' story too. So you might think, it's great. Yeah, God's got an agent now, right in the heart of Pharaoh's kingdom, right next to the throne where the power is. We can use this. Surely God's going to use this Moses guy to set his people free. And so maybe you'd expect the next stage to be Moses speaking out on behalf of his people, trying to say no to the injustices of the system and say, no, these people have got to be given equal rights, campaigning for them, using his influence and power. But that's not what we see. It's not that simple sometimes, is it? And Moses perhaps doesn't know that this would be the best plan. Because what happens is that Moses does have compassion for his people, for the people that he's born from. But it comes out in the form of murder. Because he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating an Israelite slave, and in response, he murders the taskmaster. And so then he's forced to flee from Egypt for fear of it all being found out and him being condemned for murder. And so as we come towards the end of chapter 2 of Exodus, we find Moses out in the wilderness. He's met a girl, he's got married, he's living in his father-in-law's house, part of his father-in-law's household, looking after his father-in-law's flocks and herds, and he has a son. And we can tell a bit about Moses' state of mind from what he calls his son, because he names his son Gershom, which to Moses means, I'm a foreigner in a foreign land. You see, where Moses has got to at the moment is he's written himself out of the story. He's like, I was in the position, but now I'm not. I'm out in the wilderness. I'm nowhere. I'm nobody. I've got nothing. I've written myself out of the story. And do you know what? I think I hear some of us do that sometimes. I think sometimes we write ourselves out of the story. I'm too old. I'm too young. I don't have the right gifts or talents. I don't have enough hair. Come on. I had to throw something in there for you, Jake. Sometimes we write ourselves out of the story. We think, it can't be me. I haven't got what it takes. God couldn't use me. Perhaps you think, I'm too far from God. I'm not good enough at praying. I'm not good enough at reading my Bible. I've done things that will make God sad. the amazing thing is that God chooses people like Moses, people like you and me, all through the Bible. We don't see God going after the people who have got it all together, who know exactly what they're doing. God chooses people who are broken and who have counted themselves out, but God's counted them in. And so we get to chapter 3. And some of you are groaning now, realising I've only just got to the start of the sermon. But we get to this chapter 3. And chapter 3 of Exodus is one of the great chapters in the Old Testament. You should definitely go home and read it again this week, because it's such a brilliant chapter. It helps us to understand about who we are and about who God is as well. And what more really can you ask from a chapter of the Bible? It's a really key place to help us understand a bit more about it. And so in chapter 3 we see Moses out in the wilderness tending a flock that's not his own, when suddenly he sees a bush that's on fire but not burning up, the famous burning bush. And I just imagine Moses has probably been spending quite a lot of time on his own, and so he's at that point where he has to say things out loud to himself to keep himself company, and so he says, "I will go over and see this strange sight, why this bush does not burn up." And so he announces it, and then presumably he goes over to it. And when he comes over to investigate this bush, God calls to him from the bush by name. Because God, he's not far from God like he thought. God is near. And God knows him. He knows who he is. He knows him by name, just like he knows each one of us by name. And he calls to him, "Moses, Moses." And Moses responds, "Here I am." And if there's only one response you make today, if you hear God's voice calling your name, respond to him and say, "Here I am. Here I am. I'm in your presence. I'm here and ready to hear what you've got to say. I'm present with your presence." It's an amazing moment where Moses is meeting God, and God's about to reveal who he is to Moses. And God starts off by letting Moses know that the place where he is standing is holy ground. And I think that's significant for us. I think we'll find out more about how God's presence works through this story of Exodus. But here, this is significant for us because I don't think that God is saying, "This mountain is the most holy mountain. You should always consider this mountain to be holy and sacred." What God is saying is, "I am here. I am here. So this is holy ground." That's where we find holy ground. Not in some place, not somewhere you have to travel, not some building built by the Victorians that you have to go to, but where God is. And we've just sung, "The presence of the Lord, the Holy One, is here." This place where we are standing now is holy ground. We are in the presence of God here. It doesn't matter that we're not in our building. This is holy ground because God is with us. And God says, "I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." And Moses is in awe because he realises who he's talking to, and he hides his face. He knows how unworthy he is to be having this encounter. And God says to him, "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I know what's going on. When you're going through difficult things, you're not alone. It's not that no one sees you, that no one knows and understands, because God knows and understands what you're going through. He sees people when they're in darkness, when they're in difficulty. He hears their crying. And so he hears the crying now of the Israelites in slavery. And he's concerned for them. He loves them. He has compassion for them, just as he has over us today. And so God announces, "I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. I have come to rescue them." If you thought Moses was being set up to be the hero of the story, here's where it flips. And we realise that it's God who is the hero that we've been looking for. God who's the hero of his people, the one who comes to rescue. I have come to rescue. And that's still God's role now. God is the one who comes to rescue. And he cares. And he wants to rescue people from all kinds of things that they're trapped in. And so God says, I've come to do this. And perhaps Moses is thinking, yes, this is amazing. I've met with God, and what good news for my people. God's going to go to Egypt, and he's going to rescue them. Amazing. I'll just sit here and look after sheep and raise a cup to God who rescues people. Yeah. Nope, that's not how God works. God says, so now you go to Egypt. And tell Pharaoh this. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. I wonder if Moses would go, but you said it was you. You said I'm going to rescue you. Why are you sending me? I've just shown you how, you know me. You know how terrible I would be for this job. And that's reflected in his question. His question is, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And it's a question that we all have to ask ourselves is, who are we? What's our identity? It's a question that our young people are struggling with in schools now. The society is trying to tell them all kinds of things. You can be whoever you want to be. And they're struggling to find something to anchor their identity in. Young people are asking this question, who am I? We might be asking that question, who am I that I should be part of God's plan? If you're identifying with Moses and you think, God's sending me out into the world to proclaim how good he is, to be part of his rescue plan. You might be asking yourself, but who am I that I should be part of that? We struggle with our identity sometimes, and it's because we use all of these earthly constructs to construct our identity. We use our wealth or our position of authority, our job, our family, all of these things we try to put together to say, this is who I am. I think what God is saying in his answer is that's not the most important thing. That you've missed the point when it comes to asking who I am. Because what God says doesn't sound like he's answering Moses' question. If you were playing that game, who am I, with a card on your head, and you were saying, who am I? And someone says, I will be with you. You'd be like, that doesn't help me at all. That doesn't help me answer that question. But what we find is that God saying, I will be with you, redirects our attention to what's really important about our identity. We are the ones that God is with. We are the ones who have God with us. And that's a much bigger identity marker than our sexuality or our job or whatever it is. That's so important because God is the creator and king of the whole universe. And he says, I'm with you. I'm with you. Not just with you, I'm for you. I'm on your side. You're part of my team. We're in this together. It's like if you walked into something with, for some reason I keep on using this metaphor of a club. I've not really been to many clubs. But if you turned up at a club and there's a big queue to get in, but you're coming in with a celebrity, the celebrity's going to jump to the front of the queue, aren't they? They're going to be let in, even though there's a queue. And if you can say, I'm with them, then suddenly you become somebody because of who you're with. And that's the same for us. We become somebody because of who we're with, who is with us, because God is with us. That's like the first marker of who we are, the most important thing about who we are. And so God says that to Moses. Who am I? I will be with you. Who are you? God will be with you. Okay, so that's the first question that Moses asks. It's not about his background, his qualifications. It's not about the fact he's familiar with the royal palace. It's not about the fact that he's been raised as a Hebrew. It's about the fact that God is with him. So we go on to his next question, because Moses thinks things through and says, well, if I'm going into this club with you and saying I'm with him, they might well ask me, well, who's this? Who is it that you're with? Do you know his name? Because if you don't know his name, then you're probably not with him. You can see where Moses is going. He probably didn't think about a club at the time, but you can see where Moses' mind is going. If you're claiming that you know God and that God knows you, you've got to be able to back that up. You've got to know his name. And again, it seems like God doesn't answer Moses. God, what's the name that I can give you? Who can I tell people sent me? I am who I am. You know, thanks God, super helpful. But that is what God says his name is. It kind of sounds weird to us because we don't use that through the rest of the Old Testament. So the Hebrew word that is used at this point when God says, I am who I am, is God says, Yahweh. That's his name. And you might have heard that as a name of God, Yahweh, because it means I am who I am. It also means I was, I am, and I will be, I am. It's like it doesn't make sense in our set of tenses because God is the same yesterday and today and forever. He's got no beginning and no end. He will always just be, I am. He always has been, I am. He just is. I am who I am. Okay? And all the way through the Bible, if you read through your Bible, wherever it says Lord in capital letters through the Old Testament, that's actually where it's using that name. I am who I am. Wherever it says Lord. So you'll actually, now that I've pointed this out to you, you'll start spotting it all the way through the Bible. Lord in capital letters, all in capital letters, it means they're using that word. I am who I am. All the way through Scripture. This is the name that God is known by. And this is still his name. He says, this is my name forever. You'll call me by this name from generation to generation. Even to today, even in Mansfield, you will call me I am who I am. And what God says about himself reveals not just something about himself, but about his relationship with us. Because if God is that I am, then that means that for us, we can be that I'm not. So when I'm thinking, I'm not very skillful, I'm not very powerful, I'm not very wise, I'm not very knowledgeable, I can't do this, God's response to all of that is, that's okay, that's not your job. I am that. I am powerful. I am good. I am love. I am all these things. Well, we don't have to be responsible for everything. I don't know how many things you've taken on as burdens, but because you think this is my responsibility. I've got to do this. I've got to be this. Because people are depending on me. People are counting on me. I've got to be this. Well, when God says this to Moses, it's like he's releasing us from that burden. You don't have to be that because I am. I am what you need. I am what everyone needs. I am who I am. And it's a really amazing moment in Scripture, a moment where God reveals who he is, and that's why they continue to use it all the way through the Bible. God is. And so what I want you to kind of see in yourself today is imagine yourself standing in Moses' shoes. Or not shoes, because he had to take them off. Standing in the presence of God. God calling you by name and saying, I know you. I know you don't think you're good enough, but will you be part of my rescue plan? Not because you've got something amazing to offer, but because I'll be with you. I want you to be part of this. Because I am who I am. Will you be part of it? And perhaps your response today will be, here I am. Maybe I don't know exactly what it is you require of me, God, but I'm here, and I'm ready, and I'm listening. I'm in your presence. I'm with you like you're with me. I'm in. And as you're thinking that, it's an amazing privilege to become part of God's plan. Because God's plan didn't stop at the end of Exodus. It doesn't stop at the end of the Gospels. God's plan still continues. God's plan to rescue all people from the things that hold them down. From addictions, from modern day slavery, from illnesses and diseases, from mental health problems, from all the kind of things that trap people. God is still a God of rescue, and he wants us to join in with him, like he wanted Moses to join in with him. God says, I have seen what is going on. I'm not blind to it. I know what this world is like. I have promised that I will rescue, that I will save. That is who I am, and I don't change. And I will do what I've promised, because when God promises, he does it. I just want to finish by quickly looking at chapter 4, because we'll be skipping out chapter 4. Maybe go and read this in your own time. Because even with all of this, even with such an amazing God on our side, sometimes we still end up saying, but what if I don't have what it takes? What if I'm not enough? What if I mess it up, God? What if I don't do this right? Moses has the same question. He says, God, I hear all that, but what if they don't believe me or listen to me? What if it all goes wrong? What if I try and do what you say, but it doesn't work? What if I'm not enough? What if I don't have what I need? Or, I've got nothing. And God says, what's that in your hand? Moses goes, it's just a stick. It's just my staff. That's all I've got in my hand. I don't own anything. These aren't my sheep. I don't have a home. I don't have a country. I don't have a people. All I've got is this stick. And God says, with that stick, I'll do signs and wonders that will make all people know who I am. I don't want to spoil it, but we're going to go on to hear all of the amazing things that we'll see Moses doing, and it will specifically mention this piece of wood so many times. This stick, that's all that Moses had. I'm pretty sure that most of you have got more than just a stick. God can use us, whatever we've got, he can use what we've got, and he can turn it into miracles. He can do amazing things through us if we're willing to say, here I am. Let's pray. God, we thank you that we can be in your presence, undeserving, but loved by you. And thank you that you choose us to be part of your rescue plan. And so all we want to say to you in response, God, is here we are. Use us, send us. But be with us, because that's what we need.